Welcome back to the Communication Mastery Podcast with me, Mark Burlinson. We're unleashing the power of understanding so we can build bridges between people rather than putting them in boxes, because we understand that communication is the key to effective teamwork in business. And so if your team needs more effectiveness, let's learn together to be able to leverage this understanding for the benefit of everybody. And today I want to talk again about the way you tell your story. Storytelling is such a powerful part of communication, and your story, or maybe more accurately, your stories, plural, have power, particularly if you use them in the right way and you leverage them effectively in communication. So let's talk about that. I've got 3 keys to leveraging your story to be more powerful in your communication, and then a couple of pitfalls to avoid that we'll tag on at the end. The first way that you're going to make sure that your story brings power to your communication is to align your story with a clear purpose, so that you're going to choose a story from your own experience that communicates or supports your goal or the message you want to pass on. It might be that you want to inspire your team. It may be that you want to clarify your values or to refocus on a point of your mission, or you may want to motivate people to action. Whatever the clarity that you have in your goal for communication, choose a story that's going to align with that. So, for example, for me, I want to see leaders lead courageously. I want to see them step up and be inspiring in their leadership. And so I might tell a story like this. I met with a young leader recently. This is a couple of weeks ago now, but he was discouraged. He felt like he was a failure. He felt like he wasn't being effective. And he came to me. In fact, I went to him now, I recall. I went to him because I could see he was discouraged. And in our interaction, I was able to affirm the strengths that I see in him. I wanted to affirm his character, because his character, which is great, was still tangible despite his disappointments and despite his discouragement. And as I started to affirm him, he began to actually tear up. And you could see that in his crying, there was a shift in his heart. And I could see his resolve strengthening as someone told him that they believed in him. As I told him, I could see these strengths in his life. As I told him, I could see the character that he was bringing to his leadership. And so he left that encounter with stronger resolve. And you have the same power to boost and affirm the others in your team with your leadership. And so I encourage you to do the same. You see how that story touches a nerve in our hearts where we've experienced something similar, but it aligns with my goal to help leaders to lead courageously. The second key to leveraging your story is to be authentic and relatable. So you want to share a real experience that shares or reflects your values, your humanity, your integrity. So you want to avoid embellishing the story. You want to avoid the flowery details that might make it sound more spectacular, but actually just the reality of a simple encounter can be far more powerful because it's authentic, and authenticity builds trust. So you want to maybe talk about a mistake you made and the lesson that it taught you, because that would show vulnerability, but it also shows growth. And so if you can be real, if you can be transparent, that's a very valuable and very powerful way of leveraging your story and letting the power of your story bring power to your communication. For example, I made a mistake in a communication workshop one time. I was sharing with a whole leadership team of a very important nonprofit organization, and I shared some negative examples about one of the 7 communication styles because I'd seen some negative examples in my work the previous couple of weeks. But because I shared those negative examples, I had to apologize and rebuild trust with 2 of the leaders in that room who had that specific communication style as their primary style. And it sounded like I was being down on them. It sounded like I was devaluing how they were wired. That was a huge mistake to make when I was trying to help this team to communicate more effectively. but I owned it right in the moment as soon as I realized. And I had to rebuild that trust with those specific leaders by giving other examples where their language was powerful, was valuable. In fact, the lesson I learned from that was when I'm presenting the 7 communication styles in that way, I want to make each language sound like it's the best language. So in every situation, I make that language that I'm speaking about at the time sound like the very best, so that the people who have that language first and foremost in their profile will know that I see them and I affirm them and I value what they bring to the table. Each one in turn, because remember, we all have all 7 communication styles, but each one sounding like the best is the most authentic way to help people embrace the way they're wired. So that authentic story, I made a mistake and I learned from it. And that helps you to engage with what you can take away from our communication. So the third key to telling your story powerfully is to keep it concise and to keep it focused. So avoid rambling. I tried in that previous story not to give you lots of detail, lots of sidetracks. You want to structure your story with a clear beginning, a clear middle, and then a clear ending, so that you can highlight the key takeaway that your audience can apply to their own situations or their own lives. Rather like I did when I said I learned to make each language sound like the best language. Here's another example of that. When I moved my family from England to North America years ago now, it was really challenging and inspiring for all of us. Challenging and inspiring in equal measure, I would say. So many things were different. The culture is different. The language is different. Even the food is different. And so when we arrived, the very first thing I had to do when I landed on North American soil was to drive on my own a rental car, following the folks who'd hosted us. I had to drive a rental car on the wrong side of the road on highways that were bigger than any highway I'd ever seen. This is the 12 lanes in each direction highway that runs alongside Toronto Airport in Canada. And it was scary. That experience of adapting to a whole different culture, a whole different setting, it really scared me, but it really stretched me as well. And I came away from that experience with the courage to face new challenges. And I still draw on that courage today. Because I did that and I achieved it and learned from it, now I'm able to draw on that same courage in completely different settings today to be able to tell other people your greatest tests will become your greatest growth points. And that's a message that you can take away by identifying with that little story from my past. So when your story is concise, when it's focused, you can really have an impact in your communication. So I said there would be 2 pitfalls for us to avoid. Let's detail those briefly. The first is to make the story about you instead of about your audience. In the example I just gave you, if I'd majored on how difficult it was for me to drive on the wrong side of the road on this huge highway, rather than turning it around and applying it to you and saying your greatest challenges can become your greatest growth points, then you'd have lost interest, because who cares about Mark trying to drive on a highway? But when you get the lesson out of the story and apply it to the audience, that will be far more powerful. So avoid stories that feel self-congratulatory or maybe irrelevant to the audience. You need to focus on how your experience is connecting to the need that you want to meet in the person or the people that you're speaking to. Or maybe it's going to help them face a challenge, like the story we just used. So that's one pitfall to avoid. Don't make it about you, make it about your audience, whether it's an audience of one or an audience of many. And then the second is to get lost in the details. If you keep adding in layer after layer of what the car was like, or what the traffic was doing, or how long the flight was before you got there, all those kinds of details are irrelevant to the main point of the story. Keep it honed down to the main point so that your audience can capture that point and apply it to themselves. If they've got 6 or 7 points, they're going to lose track and it won't be as effective. It'll dilute your message. You'll lose your audience's attention. So stay focused on those key moments that drive the point home. So use the power of stories in your communication. You can use the power of story one-to-one with somebody that you want to train or help or encourage, or even with somebody who you want to learn from. If you tell them part of your story, then they can see more clearly how to help you. So individual interaction is always helped with the power of thought out story, but also in a team setting, in a group setting. Maybe you want to motivate your sales team, or maybe you need to pull your whole department together to focus on this quarter's challenges. Be authentic, keep it concise, and you'll find that there's greater engagement and you'll become more effective as a leader or as a communicator as you master this communication strategy. So if you know someone who hasn't subscribed to our podcast yet, who would benefit from what we've just talked about, why don't you use the share button in your podcast app and send them a link to this episode? Or if you are not subscribed yourself, just hit the subscribe button right now so you won't miss any of the content in future episodes. We're going to have another question and response episode coming up soon. And so I'd love to hear from you. What are your questions? What are your clarifications that you'd like? What topics would you like me to focus on in the future? What are some of the challenges you're facing that I can help you deal with by addressing them in a future episode? Just send me that feedback from my website at markberlinson.com. Click on the contact link and send me an email, and I'd be glad to include the answers in the next question and response episode, or even maybe focus a whole episode on a challenge that you're facing. And if you're not getting my emails, then go to my website and look for the business communication paper button. I'll send you a free business communication paper and then send you a weekly email following that with more communication insights. So go ahead and subscribe, go ahead and get onto the email list, and share this with a friend. They'll thank you for it. And we'll see you next week.